Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, Nurses Supporting Indigenous Wellness and Changing Lives and Shaping Tomorrow. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam people. Please feel free to introduce yourselves and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarain Squawkin. I'm the Learning Circle Manager. I am Syilx Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory Apache and Belgian on my father's side. And working behind the scenes, I'll be today's moderator for today's discussion. And joining us working behind the scenes is Cynthia, our production coordinator. She'll be interacting with everyone in the chat. So yeah, and then finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be emotional or sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you're looking after yourself, and if at any point in time you need to talk to an elder, friend, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat if you need additional support. Now I'll turn it over to our guests to introduce themselves.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Serene. Good morning, everybody dialing in, and good morning to the panelists. I just want to take a minute to welcome everybody to the session. We have a great panel this morning, and our intention today is to celebrate Nursing Week by taking some time to have a conversation cafe with several incredible nurse leaders who can share their lived experience and about their career journey and where they're at today. I am Riley David. I am Director of Allied Health Professional Practice at the FNHA, and I'm calling from unceded Squamish Nation territories where I live as an incredibly grateful guest. My professional background is in social work, and I am from Sycamore First Nation with Scottish and German ancestry. Before we start, I also wanted to take a quick minute to thank everybody at UBC and the FNHA who worked in the background today to bring this session together. Your efforts are seen and very appreciated. So I'll do a quick panel introduction and then turn over to each participant to introduce themselves and kind of deepen that connection that we're going to have today. So today we have Talila Geese, nurse in charge. She works in Lillooet and Lytton. Inez Louis, the manager of clinical quality. We have Gary Housty, executive director, Office of the Chief Nursing Officer, and Shannon Burnett, community health nurse from the resource team in the Northern region. So I think maybe I'll start with you, Talila, if you want to do a bit of an introduction.
Hello, everybody. Just making sure you can hear me okay. Awesome. My name is Talila. I am from the Tahltan Nation that resides up north in Telegraph Creek, BC. It's near Whitehorse, so it's way, way up north. I've been a registered nurse for 4 years. I graduated in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, and a year later I started with First Nations Health Authority, and I've never looked back. And I'm excited to be here and answer all your questions today. I am calling in from the unceded territories of the Statliam Nation here in Lillooet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Talila. Inez, why don't you introduce yourself?
Pasiam Tisyaya, Lachelta Not Telsqui, Politzaquasco Kale, Samath, Musqueam, Tootnawaz, and Abing, Red River Valley. Good morning, everybody. My name's Inez Lewis. I am from the Point family in the Scoquel First Nation. I am a registered nurse and alumni of the UBC School of Nursing in 2006, dare I say. So it feels like many moons ago, but also only yesterday. Really excited to join everybody today from my home community of the Scoquel First Nation, where I work full-time as the clinical quality manager for the quality team in the Office of the Chief Nursing Officer. Osiam.
Thank you. Shannon?
Tantse, Nina Sepago Nikikisqueo. Hi, my name is Blue Otter Woman. I am calling from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The people here are Cree, Dene, Ojibwe, Oji-Cree, and Métis. This is the land of Métis Nation. I am originally from Treaty 5 territory, where I am status with Mississipauga Cree Nation. My work background is I've been a nurse for 9 years. I graduated in 2015 and I've only worked in the north. I worked in Manitoba, and last January I started with FNHA. It kind of found me through a very spiritual path, which I am on. And I love it. I love working in BC. I love FNHA, and I've honestly never had a more supportive, culturally appropriate, culturally supportive employer ever. So very thankful to be here, and thank you to all the other panel members.
Thank you, Shannon. Go ahead, Gary.
Thanks, Riley. Yo, Estopa, greetings, hello. My name is Gary Housey. I have an Indigenous name, Minuk Whistles, which translates into one wolf. I come from the Haystrick First Nation on the central coast of BC. There's a picture behind me that I took a number of years back in my home community with this ancestral visitor. It was incredible, a moment. So I've been hanging out at the First Nations Health Authority. This is my 6th year, and I serve as an executive director in the Office of the Chief Nursing Officer. So my 22nd year as well, working in the nursing profession. I acknowledge that my family and I live and work in the beautiful occupied and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. So grateful for that offering. I have quite a journey getting to where I'm at today, and look forward to sharing that today. And belated happy Nurses Week to everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. That's actually a really beautiful transition into our first question, which is what made you want to become a nurse? And if you could share a little bit about how did you get to where you are? And maybe we'll start with Gary and then popcorn around.
Okay, yes. Gosh, I have a story to share. So I always go back to the path of becoming a registered nurse. For me, started with my mom in community. So I grew up in my beautiful Haystrick territory on the Central Coast. And I would often join my mom. I have a twin sister, and we would tag along often to community events and community potlatches and ceremonies and gatherings. And what we witnessed from a very tender young age was my mom supporting individuals and families, and often through significant events and crisis as well. And we were always at her tail, and even when she was helping people. She had many different roles in her career, but really at its foundation, she was an advocate. And mind you, a fierce advocate for the health and wellness of my community. So she really inspired myself and my sister to head into the humanities. So that I went into nursing school. My twin sister went into social work. And just really, our upbringing was really important in determining our career paths. I enjoyed sciences. I enjoyed math and biology, human anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology. All of those courses fascinated me. If you guys remember in the late 90s, there was this television show called ER. It was a big inspiration for me. And that was really where I was drawn to what nurses do using their hands, and just the technical skills was really eye-opening to me. I think too, Riley, my last comment on that is one of my most important reasons was I recall my late grandfather sitting us, his grandchildren down in a row. We're very young. I remember this conversation. He's a survivor of Indian residential school. And he wanted us to have equal access to education and equal access to employment in our province here. And he shared something that I'll never forget. He said, just really get out there, go get an education, get your higher education, and but also come back. Please come back to your community and serve. And I had that privilege to do that in my nursing career, and I'm so grateful for that. So thanks.
Thanks, Gary. Shannon, you spoke a little bit about this, but do you want to share a little more? Like, what made you want to become a nurse, and how did you get to where you are now?
Sure. Funny, my story's pretty similar to Gary's. My mom was a nurse. I went around with her to communities. I watched her in action. I remember I was like 14 or 15, and we were just driving down like the streets of Winnipeg one time, and we seen someone pulled over and they were having a seizure. And I watched her, like we pulled over, parked, and I watched her get into action. And I was like, wow, I want to do that. And we were fortunate enough she took the nurse in charge position in our home community of Mississiplastic Cree Nation, Grand Rapids, Manitoba. And I loved watching her with the community members, like our people, they loved her. Like there was something so strong, like some strong pull, spiritual pull, that like this was my path too. My grandma was a nurse, my mom, my stepmom, I have a whole family of nurses and doctors. But I always knew I wanted to be a nurse. And when I was in high school, I got the best grades. I worked very hard, and I applied for nursing school, Red River here in Winnipeg. I was put on a 1-year waiting list, and I was very excited. Simultaneously at that time, I did have a boyfriend. I did, for whatever reason, decide to go off birth control because it was making me fat. And then lo and behold, I got pregnant. So I unfortunately suffered really, really terribly from hyperemesis gravidarum. So I had morning, noon, night sickness. I got my acceptance letter into nursing that summer. I found out I was pregnant, and I couldn't do it. Like, I had to put my baby first and us first, and I had to delay nursing school until my baby could start her own school. So when she was in grade 2, I got into the U of M UCN JB Joint Baccalaureate Nursing Program, and I graduated in 2015. So I've been a nurse in the North since then, but it was always my calling. It was always my dream. And I see, when I'm with community members, the same way that they looked at her, they looked at me, and I know, like, I'm definitely in the right field. I just want to make a difference in Indigenous health, and in my spiritual path, that is my goal ultimately. So.
Wow, that's beautiful. Inez, do you want to tell us about your journey?
Sure. I love hearing other people's stories, and excited about hearing the other panelists as well. So I was really keen in high school, and both of my parents are educators. So school was number one all of the time, and very fortunate in my family. There was lots of people in university, going to university, and it was the expectation that all of us were to serve the people in one way or another. And that's a mandate that came directly from my grandmother, who, happy belated to her, she just turned 97. Kuli Huya is her name. She's our matriarch. And so as well as my mom's late mother, Hazel Goslin, her maiden name's Rattlesnake, from Tutanwasinabing Valley River. It was her mandate to always help the family, help our people. And so really keen on going to university. There's lots of politicians in my family. My dad's the chief. My uncle Stephen has done a lot of politics. He's a lieutenant governor. And so they were really pushing law on a lot of us cousins. And there's lots of cousins. And Uncle Stephen particularly was like, law, 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 the land question, we're not in treaty and sovereignty, all this stuff. And I thought, okay, that's really important and cool, but I want to be a doctor. And I had this tunnel vision of being a physician and wanted to be a female Indigenous physician and come back, because there was one provider in our community in Chilliwack who was a non-Indigenous man, past retirement age, but he sort of was the one person all the Indigenous folks wanted to see. And as a result, it was very difficult to be seen by this physician. And so in my mind as a young person, I thought, oh, here's a gap that I could fill. When we took first aid, I really liked responding and I really enjoyed that. And tried my hand at first year science fresh out of school, as a very young woman, leaving the community, leaving my reserve on my own, really was struggling with some grief and loss at the time. We had lost 3 people in our family consecutively the summer after grade 12, one to overdose. And this was in 99, when we weren't talking about overdose a lot at that time. It was sort of like, we don't talk about those things. In our language, we might say skacha, we don't talk about those things. And so did not do well in my first year of science and conceded that, well, maybe I don't need to do that. That's not my path. And after coming home and working a number of different administrative jobs with the band office, with our local tribal council, stumbled upon the health department. And one of my aunts was working as the lead community health nurse and home care nurse, and started having conversations with her. And she shared her story with me that she's a day school survivor. She had gone back and finished high school. Then she did her prerequisites, and then she did her bachelor in science of nursing. And she shared how much money she was making with me. And I thought, wow, that was the other mandate, is don't live hand to mouth. And how can we reinvest in our community, in our culture? And so that's when I started looking into nursing and realizing, oh, this is the pathway that I want to invest. It probably makes more sense than medicine. And so applied, really had to make my case, because my grades weren't good. I had failed a lot of my courses in my first year science as a result of just not being in a good headspace, but appealed my case, got an exception letter, got my community behind me, and I was accepted and later graduated as a valedictorian, which was just a far cry from where I'd started out in my first year. And so choosing nursing was the best choice I made so that I could serve the people. And I've been so blessed to be able to do that in my own community and just love the work. And, connecting back to some of the inspirational stories in the mandate from my grandmothers, remembering that my grandmother had told me stories about how she worked as a nurse's aide after she had finished residential school in the Kokolitsa Hospital, which at that time was a TB hospital, one of the Indian hospitals, so to speak. So full circle, she couldn't go all the way and she wanted to. And so she tells me, I'm happy that you went all the way, and I carry that with me.
Beautiful. Talila, will you tell us a little bit about what made you want to become a nurse, and how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all your wonderful stories. And I love the connections of moms there, because that's a big reason why I went into nursing as well. My mom grew up on reserve in Telegraph Creek, where there was no electricity and no running water. She was on the reserve for most of her life. And it was actually her dad that said, get an education and go and make us proud. So she went and she left the reserve, and she didn't have her high school diploma or anything, but she actually upgraded and she got into dental hygiene. So she was one of the first dental hygienists up north from Telegraph Creek. And, she has an amazing career, and she always had that goal for me as well, is to get an education so you can be comfortable in life. Really early on, I remember in grade school, somebody coming in and teaching us about seizures and what to do if somebody was having a seizure. And our uncle was staying with us at the time, and he had had a seizure. And, I got to talk, even as a small girl, I got to talk through what to do when my mom was there with it. And she thought that was something really special at an early age. But of course, I had a lot of fears going into nursing in high school. I didn't realize that I was actually quite smart and I could get good grades. So it was the middle of high school and some special teachers that made me realize that, I was smart and I could do this. Still had a lot of fears going into nursing school, but the one person that always really believed in me was my mom. And just seeing her come off of a very, very rural reserve and go into university and be able to do that for herself really gave me the courage. So I did my first year in Prince George. I did everything. I did sociology, criminology. I was thinking maybe RCMP, but I took anatomy and I just fell in love with it. So I started upgrading, and the next year I got into nursing school in Kamloops, BC. And, the first 2 years were a rough and wonderful ride. It was hard, but, persevered through. And I would just say like the biggest inspiration and what got me through would definitely be my mom. That's my story. Thank you.
Such beautiful stories, and I think they all play so nicely into our next question. So what role do nurses play in impacting community wellness? And I think each of you kind of spoke to this beautifully in your introductions, but maybe we can start with you, Gary.
Yeah, wow, this is a question that has many facets. So I'll just I was reflecting about this question. So the first one that comes to mind when you think about nurses and registered nurses and healthcare providers in the nursing field is that direct patient care. So nurses are pivotal and essential to delivering healthcare services, public health, primary care, home and community care, as well as the emergency services as well. And through much of the tools that we gain in the higher education that we've obtained, listening to my colleagues talk about just the courses, is really learning how to do assessments, those subjective and objective assessments, triaging the treatments, and just the follow-up interventions. The other thing that doesn't get talked about often in our remote communities is the mandate of emergency services and caring for really sick clients that require higher level of care, and medevacing clients to those bigger centers. So that's a big role that our FNHA nurse Shannon would be familiar with that, listening to her story. The other thing that I think about is education and health education. Nurses educate community about health practices and disease prevention, those good public health principles, chronic conditions management, lots of promoting healthy lifestyles through screening and vaccinations, you name it, Riley, nutrition and exercise and all of that good stuff. We learned a lot about public health during the COVID-19 pandemic, and this was very eye-opening for me as a nurse who doesn't have a public health background. In the beginning of my career, I was an emerge nurse. I did that for about 12 years, worked in a big level 3 trauma center here in the Lower Mainland. That was my first passion. And then during the pandemic, I really learned so much about public health campaigns, public health work, and it really drove a lot of our strategic priorities in serving our communities. I think another big thing, Riley, is advocacy. We're advocates, and we stand in spaces where there aren't voices, and we advocate for not only individuals but their families and their communities, and lots of outreach. And the other piece too, there are colleagues out there and healthcare providers that are really linked to research and evidence-based practice as well. So big components around what nurses do and impacting community wellness. Thanks.
Beautiful. Shannon, do you want to answer?
Well, pretty well, Gary hit every single nail on the head. But I'll add, the people know when your heart is in it. I know that when I'm with my patients, I always identify myself as an Indigenous woman. Where I work in the remote rural communities, there are a lot of resources per se, but in that moment when there's like 2 nurses in a community, you're everything. You're the nurse, the therapist, sometimes the parent if there's nobody else. Like you're everything to the people in their most vulnerable times of need. Like us as nurses, apart from like people who are seeking out kind of prophylactic healthcare, I guess, we don't usually see people in at their best. They're vulnerable. They're looking to us for help, guidance, like anything. And they know when your heart is in it. And I'm not tooting my own horn because it took me a very long time to find my own light and see my own light. But I know my interactions with my patients is everything. Like I get thanked, I develop a lot of relationships like with patients, which sometimes they say is unethical, but it's just, if you have love to give it. Like, I don't know, not in any inappropriate ways. But anyway, I digress. But everything Gary said, I agree with, on top with like patients know, people know when your heart is in it or not. And I think that the majority of us choose this profession to make a difference in community health and people's health, Indigenous health, and the people know. So thank you to all of us.
Yeah, I love that. It's like undoing the mistrust, like one relationship at a time, which is like integral to overall community wellness. But Inez, do you want to tell us a little bit about like what role do nurses play in impacting community wellness?
Absolutely. And I feel like Gary and Shannon, you've both laid a good foundation for what I wanted to focus on as well, and maybe connecting to what you've shared, Shannon. And I wouldn't say it's tooting your horn. It's the foundation of everything we do as Indigenous nurses when working in Indigenous communities, because the old way is our kinship ties and our relationships. We don't ever do business in our communities without breaking bread with folks. Learning about their families, learning how many children do you have, where are you from, what is your experience, even the journey as an Indigenous person. So many of us come with our identity in the journey of embracing or even learning about our identity in so many different ways, and those stories are all so important. Some folks may have grown up in care, some folks may have grown up with an adoptive family, some people may have never been to their community. Some people grew up in their community. Those are all such valuable stories. And there's so many other people out there with similar stories to us. And so building those relationships with folks who have differing or similar stories with us is what helps build that trust. And sometimes our patients are our teachers, or our clients are our teachers. My dog is desperately wanting to have a feature. And so I think that I appreciate that you've highlighted that, Shannon, about the kinship and relationship, because yes, anybody can go to nursing school and have those assessments, but like what Gary said, it's how we implement those assessments and through the connections that we build, because without that trust, folks won't allow us to care for them. I don't know how many times in my community health nurse and home care role, I've begged my clients to get consent from them to call an ambulance for them, and working with them to reassure them that we will walk through this journey with them. And so as a nurse, we provide a sense of safety for folks in Indigenous communities. And yes, we can't reassure the entire journey, but that we will commit to do our best to creating that. And so sometimes I use the metaphor of like being in a storm and all the tent poles in the tent are broken, but you're there holding it up, creating space for somebody else. Maybe somebody else is doing the work, or they're doing the work for themselves. We can never do the work for people, but we can encourage them, create space for their voice, encourage them to speak up and ask for what their needs are in a good way. And if not, be a translator, a navigator, and a connector, creating those networks, leveraging our networks and community, our professional networks to ensure folks are getting what they need.
Great. Talila, do you want to speak a little bit about what role nurses play in impacting community wellness?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love what Inez said as well. Yeah, like I started off my career, I thought I was going to be an emerge. I did it for a year, but I feel like I lost myself along the way a little bit because I couldn't form those connections with the patients, and I was burnt out, and I felt my empathy just like starting to go down. And then I feel like FNHA just found me at the right time, and they approached me and wanted to bring me on as an Indigenous nurse. And I never thought of myself as a community health nurse. But one thing I feel like I have a strength in is building that trust within community, because when I got put into certain communities, at first nobody came to see me. It was a little bit disappointing. And after the first year, after joining in with their community events and just getting to know people, just asking how they are, how their family is, I started gaining that trust within the community, and waving to them like on the road if I see them, like just small little gestures like that. It brings them in to see me. And it's not only just about immunizations and stuff like that. Some people will just come in and sit with me, and they'll tell me about their experience with the healthcare system. And I love giving them the knowledge of how they should and should not be treated in the healthcare system. And I feel like that's very close to home, because even up north in Vanderhoof, my mom had a really, really bad experience in emergency, and experienced a lot of racism. And she didn't even realize that she was experiencing racism. She thought that this was how the healthcare system was supposed to treat her. So I love when people tell me their stories, and then I can be that advocate for them, and I'll be like, no, that's not right. You should not be treated in the healthcare system like that. And throughout the years, I feel like I've just developed this trust with the community where they can come and speak to me, even if it's just about the day that they're having or anything like that. And then we start to build on to their health and their history. And that's when I can do my educating. And I find that in that way is when I get to know their health history and do the assessments. And I think it's quite magical, actually, because I never got to do that in Emerge. Thank you.
But it's so interesting. So each of you really have highlighted, I think, like the trust in the relationship pieces being integral components of your practice. And it's funny because it just like merges into our next question so beautifully. And I think what we'll do is we'll change direction a little bit. So we're building on new voices as we answer questions. I love when I hear somebody else speak, I always am like, oh, I want to say something. So feel free to jump in. But Talila, maybe you can tell us a little bit. So we think about those trust and relationships, they're integral to accessing culturally safe and compassionate care, which is essential for First Nations patients. How does your work contribute to ensuring that access is possible?
Absolutely. I think this is a great question, and I love First Nations Health Authority, and I can't speak highly enough of them because they're really their main component. One of their main components is holistic care, and that can be found in a number of ways, whether that be attending cultural events that the community has invited you to, and all of that. And yeah, so I feel like that's really important, is in integrating the holistic health side of things. And just like I mentioned before, just sitting down and speaking with people. In one of my communities, Ashcroft, we sit around a table every Wednesday and we enjoy lunch together and art together. And that's when I get to hear their stories, which is, I feel like it's not the Western way of nursing, because when I went to nursing school, we were not taught that. We were taught a very westernized medical system. You see the patient in this white walled room, you do an assessment with a form, and then you get them on their way. And I feel like this view of nursing is so different and so diverse. And I feel like a lot of nurses out there just don't understand how impactful it could be to go through a holistic lens of nursing.
Thank you so much, Talila. Inez, do you want to tell us a little bit about, so we're thinking about culturally safe and compassionate care as being an essential measure for First Nations people. How does your work contribute to ensuring that access is possible?
I've been in my role for a very short time here at FNHA, and I have to echo what you've said, that FNHA is such a great place to work, and really feeling supported, that there's so many great things that we're supported in our personal and professional development and our practice and increasing access. As a clinical quality manager, working to ensure that we're hearing the nurse voices when they're sharing their experiences with us, and looking at opportunities, how we can ensure that there's increasing access, not just for our providers, but also for the clients, because we have to make sure there's a clear path for our providers to do their work, that they have what they need. And so when they're giving us feedback about some of the experiences they've had, there's growth all around. But more so to your question, the majority of my career has been in FNHSOs, or as we call First Nations health organizations, that are funded by the FNHA and are band operated. I've worked for many years with the Stall Service Agency as a community health nurse and home care nurse, and as a nurse supervisor and strategic operations planner. And that role was really interesting. I was so fortunate to be well supported and in flagging issues where I saw there was a lack of access, and making recommendations, and really creating a summary and recommendations and putting that to the table of chiefs, where I saw, maybe I didn't have the authority to make that change, but if the leadership could, we could ask them to clear the path. So helping them to be informed on what the root of the problem was and what we saw as the path forward. And that was so exciting for me to have that opportunity to do that. And that was a learning curve for me. I'd never done that sort of work. And so I think there's lots of different veins where the work can go in terms of creating access, but also creating a place of trust. What I found during the pandemic, when the pandemic first hit, so to speak, I had a million questions in my inbox. So working in my community, living in my community, people would message me all of the time because they know me outside of work. So that's where I hear you saying, Shannon, there's that fine line between the professional and personal boundaries. And so sometimes I would say, hey, let's follow up this tomorrow, or I'll redirect you to someone. But for people that I, are relatives, I have connections with, I will work with them, or I'll say, hey, I'll follow up with you tomorrow. But there was so many questions that started filing in about what should I do, or they were needing to be walked through an isolation process. And so I was answering the same question over and over, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go live on Facebook and just answer these questions for everybody. And it ended up developing into this. We transitioned the live of answering questions over to our organization Facebook, where I started interpreting Dr. Bonnie Henry's messaging, and that it was, yes, I agree with what she's saying. I believe that we should take this on for our community. So increasing access so that there are more Indigenous voices sharing what we believe will protect us. So instead of it coming from the colonial government, that yes, as an Indigenous nurse, I hear what they're saying. I agree with that. We hope that you can align, and how can we support you to align with that? Because from our perspective, this is how we protect our elders, our knowledge keepers, our leadership, our children, all of the people. And so by increasing access to providing an Indigenous perspective on those things, people were more willing to consider how they can protect themselves and their family, opposed to meeting those things perhaps with fear or mistrust, which is so pervasive and valid based on our colonial experiences. So with the FNHA, seeing so many folks, Indigenous folks in leadership, I think it creates access in more ways than we even know. And I'm thankful for that. I appreciate the leadership and the Indigenous representation there.
I love this. Shannon, what do you think?
I definitely agree with both Talila and Inez. FNHA so supportive in, like, to just kind of piggyback off of Talila. Specific courses that I found very helpful in culturally safe, compassionate care was the Sanyas cultural course that every FNHA, well, I had to take to be a community health nurse. I found it just so, it was so real and so humbling, bringing the residential school impacts. It actually gets you to reflect on your own possible, maybe, I don't want to say discriminations, but like your own views, your own cultural ideals and stuff like that, in a very productive, non-shameful way. So I really, really love that course. I actually in Manitoba have recommended that course to quite a few people because I found it just so immersive and just enlightening. And the other one, specifically like with the Western medicine viewpoint, deconstructing the woman's or people born with cervixes, gynecological experiences. So we have to take a pelvic exam course, and it really focuses on deconstructing the sterile, very cold, very invasive, like it's still an invasive procedure, but at least with this course, it brings like, it gives the autonomy back to the patients. And that's so important to build these trusting relationships, because when you're giving people back their power, then they're, like Inez said, like you can't do you can help people, but they essentially have to do the work and they have to be autonomous in ways, and building trusting relationships is giving back people their autonomy. And I really appreciated the mandatory courses FNHA made me take, but I'm so thankful, like I shouldn't say allowed me to take, but I'm so thankful because it gave me a different kind of viewpoint. Like I never thought about, the gynecological, it's just, it was what it was. You don't question it. You just kind of go in, put your, whatever, like everybody kind of knows what they are about, but this makes you think about it from the patient's perspective and just things like that. Another thing too that I found very amazing was how advanced BC Health is with the LGBTQ2S community, like the trans, like the community's support with healthcare. Like I am so proud to say that it's amazing in BC. It has not quite reached Manitoba yet in terms of their how advanced I find them to be, where I see them as advanced in how they like how BC Health kind of acknowledges and is kind of bringing light into different kind of healthcare pathways for like our different kind of communities. And yeah, I'm just like, I'm so in awe. I feel like my hope is that this just becomes the normal. Like this is normal. Like all of these things, all of these tools that we're getting and we're learning right now and embracing, that eventually becomes our normal, that it's not like this amazing, oh my goodness, BC is so advanced. Like, no, this is the standard across our country. So I'm hopeful for that. And I feel like that's the direction that we're in, I hope. And that would definitely encourage the therapeutic relationships with our patients. So yeah.
Such a beautiful answer. I remember very early in my career, I met a nurse who was making sure cervical exams were available for people with different abilities. And that's like when I knew, I was like, nurses are my people. Like she was just incredible. Street nurse who was like going to make it happen for everybody to have the best possible sexual health available to them. It was amazing. Gary, over to you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how culturally safe, like how does your work contribute to ensuring that culturally safe access is possible?
Yeah, thanks, Riley. I'm just I'm in awe and I'm inspired by my colleagues here, just listening to their stories. So kudos to you guys. If I go back to the last question around how do we improve impact community wellness? Well, another role I forgot to mention was leadership. Nurses get into leadership work, and that's very impactful. And I'm just hearing that in the stories. This is such an important inquiry, and what I can contribute. First is on sort of a personal note. This work is a bit of a calling. It was a calling for me, as I described earlier. I grew up in Bella Bella, in my nation. I don't like to use reserve because that's a colonial term, as we all know. My formative years, I was surrounded by family and culture, tradition. And just the land, like behind me, you can see the background. Also in those formative years, I had firsthand experience just witnessing hardship, the outcomes of colonialism. And just to share that I'm one generation from being taken away and going to Indian residential school. My eldest aunt was the last person in our family to be taken away and go. There's a Celtic teaching that always grounds me and was taught to me at a very young age, and it's a term that my team's familiar with. It's called Helsisa, and what it really translates into English is it's to take a turn for the better, and to turn around something. And to make it right. So when I think about my work and my contributions to culturally safe care, I go back to being drawn to this organization at the First Nations Health Authority and working in and so fortunate and privileged to work in the Office of the Chief Nursing Officer. We have, as an organization, cultural safety and humility is its foundation. I was hearing my colleagues share that. The other thing that I can share, and in my own learning journey, is that cultural safety can only be defined by us Indigenous peoples. And when I really think about it too, I look back to the definition of what is cultural safety, what is cultural humility. We've talked a little bit about cultural safety and that outcome of a respectful engagement amongst parties. But what I think is really the heart work is cultural humility. And that's the lifelong learning process, sort of turning that mirror on yourself and really understanding your own bias and really committing to fostering partnership and respectful communication to Indigenous clients. And that's something that I hold very close. I often have conversations, Riley, with my supervisor. Shout out to Monica McCalda, and her title is significant. It's a Vice President, Quality, Culture, Safety, and Humility, and Chief Nursing Officer. And behind that title really lays out, again, the foundation, but outlines the priority in our department. There is no other Chief Nursing Officer in our province that has this title. And so what I witness with her leadership and her work in the system is really championing anti-Indigenous racism and the cultural safety and humility efforts for the First Nations Health Authority. So kudos to Monica. It's really inspiring. The other thing I think about, I heard someone, I think it was Shannon, had mentioned the culture safety and humility standard. So this was a really impactful project in collaboration with Accreditation Canada and the Health Standards Organization. And it was developed to really specifically address Indigenous specific racism in healthcare. The other things that are foundational to my work is really looking at our organizational goals and objectives. There's quite remarkable and beautiful mission and value statements on our websites if you have time to look them up. But what I've recently been paying attention to that drives this work and this mandate is our multi-year health plan. And there are guideposts highlighted there that we're all familiar with, including quality and innovation, and culture and decolonization. And so those are things that I hold really close in my daily work. The other piece that we're really focusing on as well is traditional wellness. What does that mean? And how can we incorporate communities and individuals practicing and using Indigenous medicines in their healthcare journey and pulling that into healthcare delivery. So yeah, I'm really drawn to this organization. I heard my colleagues talk a lot about holistic care. It's quite it's a privilege, and it's inspiring, and there's incredible work ahead. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. I think like common through your answers, it has been this link and this collective experience of residential school, and I think a legacy of systemic mistrust in areas like healthcare, child welfare, justice. And so addressing Indigenous specific racism within the healthcare system has been top of mind for many people lately. Why is this so important? And Gary, I'll start with you.
Oh gosh, this is such an important inquiry. I've been doing some deep reflection on this one. I was thinking a lot about, and it's, sadly to say, just to name it, Indigenous specific racism in our province, in our country, it's alive and it's well-documented problem. I heard a colleague say at one of our Osano gatherings in 2023 that the healthcare system is saturated with racism against our peoples. And so it's a very sad statement, but the other things that I learn and walk alongside my colleagues and my supervisor and others in our organization is looking at the reports. There are key reports and frameworks that are out there that reference this inequity. And I'll just wanted to name a couple. The In Plain Sight came out and was published in 2020 and was commissioned to investigate systemic racism against me and Indigenous peoples in this province. And this was done during the height of the pandemic. There were key recommendations out of that. And one other thing that I've learned a lot about lately, recommendation 8 out of that In Plain Sight report specifically asked for a standard. And that's something that I talked about as well. And this is again led by our quality department in the OCNO under our supervisor, Monica, and our directors. It's a first of its kind standard, and it looks to address these long-standing issues. And incredible partnership with many organizations. It was published in June of 2022. I think what was really important to remark there too, it was endorsed by our First Nations Health Council and our First Nations Health Directors Association here in BC. And it was passed by the Assembly of First Nations in 2023. So lots of different organizations that are uplifting this important work. Our government has a document in 2019 called the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. I was sharing this on a different presentation with one of my directors recently. So BC has provincial law that aligns with the United Nations Declaration, and that's really, really important to have that accountability as well. The other one, Riley, I'll just share is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and the calls to action. There were 97 calls to action, and there were a number of them that were health related. And really, it just focused on naming the health disparities that are faced by Indigenous populations and how do we address them. And then also what was really neat about that was how do we incorporate Indigenous healing practices. And that goes back to consulting with Indigenous healers and elders and using those traditional medicines that I mentioned before. So yeah, it's tremendous heavy work. But with the teams that are doing this important work and the disruption that I think that we're doing as well in the system really is calling this out and looking at a good path forward on how to turn it around. And I think every step and every initiative that we do is making a difference, and we're seeing those outcomes. Yeah, thank you.
Shannon, what are your thoughts?
Well, I definitely love that Gary honed in on all the specific types of ways that we're trying to combat like it through infrastructure and organizational kind of programs of combating all this racism. I'll add, none of us are safe from racism, like none of us. There's lateral violence. All of it stems from the shame that was brought from colonization. We were made, like our ancestors, our generations before us, were made to feel shame for who we are. That in turn, like, rippled into other generations and into everything, the schools, the divisions, like, you know, myself growing up in my home community, kids from intergenerational traumas and these kinds of things, you don't understand as a kid. And in a lot of my experiences as a child, I was too white for the Indigenous kids, and I was too Indigenous for the white kids. So I suffered, you know, from racism right from childhood. As a nurse in school, like, you know, I was one of the only Indigenous students there, and it just kind of seemed, you know, like kind of cliquey, like maybe some of the non-Indigenous people would be more like flock together kind of thing. And you really have to be strong to pull yourself out of these things that are not even your fault. Like, you know, all I was trying to do was go to school and do the best I could. And then once I finished nursing, I definitely experienced racism from coworkers, bullying. I've experienced racism from patients calling me like you white bee. And I'm like, well, let me just show you my status card. No, but like things like this, like it's such a toxic poison polluting everything it touches. And it's, like obviously we all want to combat it. And there's all these things in place, like all these programs and such to like combat this racism. But like, it's got to reach every individual's heart. Like everybody has to, I don't know, find love. I know this is like a broad way of saying, but it just has to be undone with love, I would say. Love is always the answer. Anyway.
Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, it's a beautiful answer. I think around like addressing racism through like identity, like having a strong sense of like identity and self-worth. Inez, what do you think about this question?
It makes me reflect about where are we trying to go? What is the end goal? And I think the harmony of working with one another and making sure everybody has what they need and that there's equitable access based on the need. And it's a journey, not a destination, but we're so focused in the Western world of creating the goal and then getting there. And I can't help but reflect on an experience I had with my uncle, who was a lodge keeper, and we were in the sweat lodge, and he shared the story about, we had this rule in our home lodge where the women had to sit on one side and the men had to sit on the other side. And he changed that rule one day, and we were very confused because we were committed to making sure we were doing this in a good way. And he said, a little bird came into the lodge the other day and told me and reminded me through the spirit that we're all just energy and spirits. There's no gender, there's no color, there's no race. We're all just people working together. And I reflect on that if I find myself or other people misaligned, and remind myself that maybe all people sometimes forget those things and are influenced by the socialization of colonization or the manifestos of exploring and conquering and those things, and trying to keep myself grounded and working to help my colleagues stay grounded. And I want that accountability as well from my colleagues. And so when I think about the work ahead, it's all distinction based, meaning that there's a focus in on what's happening for our people and how does it impact our people, whether it's legislation, federal and provincial, and how it impacts healthcare and our ability to have access and do the work that we need to do with and for the people. Also, the policies that need to be distinction-based, from the Ministry of Health all the way to all of the services, whether they're publicly funded or privately funded, any service that our people would and could be accessing, accreditation opportunities. One of my colleagues works very closely with our FNHSOs, our band-operated organizations, and they use accreditation as a tool which they welcome and use the pieces of work for them so that they can create a safe space. And anti-racism is one of those things, to not only improve our own standards that we choose to improve, but also integrate culturally safe and cultural considerations into the policies and practices in their organizations. And it's such a beautiful thing to learn from these organizations that are sharing these now that we're building a toolkit. And then quality, and I just want to give my pitch that quality, I feel, is such an important way to go as we start analyzing the performance of our partners and working together and leaning in. How do we measure distinction-based performance for our colleagues as we're the call to action to do better? But how do we measure that? And we're in the early phases of developing, well, what are the performance indicators? And so encouraging folks to self-identify so that we can measure their performance as we develop these key performance indicators, and quality is what will drive that. So we're hoping that more folks will start studying quality, getting into quality specifically for healthcare. And then the internal call to action related to the cultural safety and humility standard, about the Sisamaya, and in our language, that's the bee. And from my perspective, we are the worker bees. And so in the scope of the anti-racism work, in the end, it falls on each and every one of us and how we take on that mandate and integrate it into every day, how we interact with one another, how we connect with one another, show love and empathy. And that's difficult because at times we're tired and we need to rest, but taking that time to rest to pick up the work in a good way so that we can be the change makers, no matter where we're working, whether we're in a place of leadership or we're on the front lines working with folks, we all have influence to use our voice and escalate the concerns to the right tables.
Oh, you just froze for a second, I guess.
Oh, I was finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Talila, I see you nodding. I know you have some beautiful thoughts to share with us around why it's so important to keep anti-Indigenous specific racism at the forefront of our conversations.
Yeah, wow, it's amazing hearing from my colleagues. Like, they have just such beautiful voices. And I feel like that brings me to my point with that is a big part of my work is giving people back their voice and their advocacy for their health. I'm more doing the groundwork here, and racism is all around us. I experienced it all throughout nursing school. We've had Indigenous professors there, and I've had fellow students calling them out in front of the whole classroom, just making the Indigenous professor feel so uncomfortable. Like I've witnessed it. And that's just the beginning, is nursing school, and it goes into the healthcare system again. And I feel like I didn't have my voice for a really long time either, because I grew up in Smithers, BC. I didn't grow up around my community. So I feel like for a really long time, I didn't have my voice either. Throughout nursing school, I feel like I was just starting to grow up a little bit where I could use my voice and say that, no, this is not right. And then I feel like I came to First Nations Health Authority, and they helped me gain my voice back as well, because I take that teachings on to my clients. If they had a bad doctor's appointment and they tell me about their health, and then I give them the education that they need so they can go and be an advocate for themselves while in the healthcare system. And I feel like that's really important work that nurses are doing, and they're doing that through developing trust with the community and with its members. And I feel like that's a big part of it. And like everybody said, racism is alive and well, but I feel like leaders and Indigenous nurses were really at the forefront, and we're building up the capacity that we can make that change. And it may not happen now. Like Inez said, it's the journey along the way. And I can, my papa used to say to my mom, one day people are going to be really proud to be Indigenous. And I feel like when I grew up, I was like, oh, I don't want to be Indigenous because of the lifestyle that I grew up in my hometown. And now today, I feel like I'm so deeply proud to be an Indigenous nurse and an Indigenous woman. And I feel like I'm seeing it in this generation, how proud people are to be Indigenous. So I feel like that, yeah, really resonates with me. Thank you.
This has been really beautiful, I think, just to get to know each of you a little better and hear your perspectives and your experiences in nursing. I note that we have one more formal question, but we also have a number of questions from our participants, and I think it would be really valuable to spend the last few minutes of our time just hearing from participants about their curiosities. So maybe I'll turn over to Sarain to look in the Q&A section and pull any questions that might be really interesting for the panel.
Thank you, Riley. I just have them here. So our first question is, what do you think the priority of health should be while providing culturally safe care? Implementing and supporting ceremony and Indigenous birth practices within harmful colonial system and ongoing racism. Oh, sort of the question kind of ended weird. Yeah, so how would you prioritize healthcare while also providing culturally safe care? Do you want to go first, Riley?
I'm not a nurse, I'm a social worker, but yes, I was like, yes, access. So when I think about culturally safe care, especially when I think about prenatal, perinatal, antenatal care, is all about access, giving birth at home, giving birth with our aunties, with our families, with our culture, our teachings on our own land. Those are the things that are priority pieces of care for me in my role and scope as social worker.
And then Shannon?
I was just gonna say, aligning with what best suits the individual patient, because every patient is different, but it's what do they want? What, not like, I want a prescription for this, not like that, but like, this is what I want in my holistic care, my culturally safe, appropriate care. Can you make this happen? Like, what do I want, like, as a patient? What do they want?
Mm-hmm. I like that. Like, kind of hearing out like the needs from the patient and seeing them out. It's very good. And then our next question is, how do nurses in general address compassion fatigue and take care of themselves as a professional? Do you feel supported by the health authorities about this? Maybe Gary?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I sort of like I want to contribute to that first question because it's I think folks are just looking for the little nuggets to take away. But what I could offer around implementing or offering culturally safe care. The first step is just listen and sit in silence with Indigenous clients that you are caring for. No matter where it is, in an office, on a stretcher, in the back of an ambulance, wherever it is. And one thing that is I've learned as well is as you build rapport, ask them about who they are, where they come from. We're very connected to land and place, and so that's really really key. Compassion fatigue, burnout, and how to incorporate wellness. That's such an important question. There's so many strategic priorities around how to support and keep healthcare providers. Gosh, if I were to have any words of wisdom on this and what I've learned from my leadership and from mentors that I've been fortunate to be connected to is it's really about that laser focus on yourself and taking that step back and pause and find those places where you build your resilience and reach out when you need help. I think that's the most important thing. And there's a lot of resources around you. And the one thing I've learned in my organization is the access to elders and the tremendous wisdom that they can give and offer us has been very rich for me as well. So just some sharing. Thanks.
And then our next question is, So the question starts out with, major barrier the Indigenous liaison nurses come up against here is how the different units at the hospital use visitors policy. We know that family is medicine, and what are some suggestions or resources that you may have for us as Indigenous liaison nurses in advocating for Indigenous families to be able to visit? Inez?
I have a comment about that.
Oh,
I
yeah.
quite often advocate for any of my family members that are sent to emerge or sent to the hospital, and I stay with them as long as possible. And I do my best to be as respectful as possible, because the intention of the visitation policy is to ensure that the staff, particularly nursing staff and caring staff, have the space to do their work uninterrupted. And at times, I think there are guests on the floor that may be disruptful to that work. And so I do my best to stay out of their way, offer to step out of the room if that works for my loved one as well as the care provider, or I offer to be with and assist with whatever work they're doing with, and demonstrate that I'm not a threat to them. I'm here to support them. I'm not here to scrutinize them, but I may provide feedback as well. I think that, often the policy is about looking at how do we ensure there's compliance with the care provided. So if I can help as a connector to help perhaps communicate with my loved one, here's your choices, here's what the care provider is trying to explain, maybe interpret, or maybe I may question the provider in a respectful way. We don't understand what you're saying. What's the reason for that? I think sometimes as family, we can become heightened and come across aggressive, abrasive, when really we're just upset that our loved one is quite ill. And so I try to share that with folks, that how do we ground ourselves first to show up for our loved one in the best way possible and create calmness. And that does create a tremendous amount of self-care, like what Gary is saying, because of course I'm upset seeing my loved one. But I think there's some workarounds. And quite often it depends on the nurse in charge, if they're willing to bend those rules. Second, if there isn't a willingness to work around that, I would say bring those concerns about potential for policy changes or when those exceptions may be considered to your supervisor, and ask those discussions to happen about at what place and time would it be helpful to consider exceptions, how would those policy changes be made, and then next, how do we share with our relatives how to be with in a good way on the ward? Because I've seen some good examples, and sometimes where folks have put themselves in a situation where they've been asked to leave. And that comes from a deep place of hurt and mistrust as well. So holding space for all of those things. And I believe that there's much work to do in helping our loved ones determine the best way to navigate advocacy of some of those policies that are currently in place.
Yes, Shannon?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add, probably definitely Talila and Inez and Gary can agree. But just going back to the other question, the avoiding burnout, we have OSISM. So we have a resource specifically for us to debrief, to talk about things. Like they reach out, especially our managers. Usually if we have a trauma code, something very significant, that our managers will reach out to them to tell them to reach out to us, and they'll offer their services if we need to debrief. Another thing is we debrief as a team after anything significant. Well, I know I always do, but in codes and traumas, loss of patients, very difficult things, we debrief as teams. What went wrong? What could go better? We are there because in those emergency situations, your team is everything, who you're with, and emotions are high, especially like with families and stuff, like losing, like whatever is happening or whatever. You're trying to do everything. It's fast. It's we're trained to handle these situations. But like I know myself, like you always feel something could have gone better, which is why it's good to debrief with your team so that you're not carrying all of that load yourself. So that, and then the other question, what was the other one that Inez just answered? I had a comment to that.
Yes, sorry, I just
Oh, sorry.
no
Oh,
worries.
the visitation
family.
policies.
Yes, the family.
The
Yes,
family.
yes. I got.
So I know that all of us that do community health nursing are trained in like TNCC or ACLS or whatever, but TNCC, ITLS, in our list of the things that we have to follow, family, having family there, these are in emergency situations or whatever, is always important. So that's an emergency situation though. So having family there in those situations is always on our minds. We know that we want to facilitate that, and we know that that's important in traumas and emergency situations. So that for sure, we don't, we do that. We make sure a family is present in those kind of situations because that is important. So I just wanted to add that. Sorry.
Definitely. Thank you. And then our next question is, I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, but just some if you have any advice for someone considering nursing or medical school, and how can we cope with racism along the way? Or do you have any advice? Talela, I know you kind of talked about your education.
Yeah. So I just got out of nursing school 4 years ago, so I feel like it wasn't so long ago that I was writing exams. I would say the biggest advice is if you have a support system, really utilize them. And as well, sometimes you just have to go for it and you have to make that leap. And I know there's probably fears and there's probably thinking like, oh, can I do this? It's 4 years, like it's a long time. I promise you it goes by so quickly, and I promise you that you're smart enough and you are good enough to do it. It takes a tremendous amount of work, but if you're passionate about helping people, that'll definitely get you through. Combating racism, oh gosh, there was and you know what, I was in my very early 20s when I went into nursing school, and you have a cohort that you're with for 4 years, and there are going to be those specific individuals who will blatantly say things towards you, and just having a really good support system with your friends, and just having the courage to have a voice. I ended up going to the chair of nursing about the racism that I saw and experienced about it. And I know that TRU now, they're not solely just doing it based on grades. They're also doing a test now where they will test your empathy and all of that. So they will do that. And it's not solely just based on grades anymore. And I feel like maybe that had something to do with it. And I really love that they are doing that now. So yeah, that's my advice for nursing school. You just got to do it.
I'll just add too, having like daily pep talks with yourself and telling yourself in your mirror every single day, I can do this. I am worthy. No one will dim my light. And when people are, this is what I do, but when people are actively trying to, I don't know, put you in your place, you just ask them, are you okay? Like, are you okay? It usually stops people. Like you force them, you address them, like you're addressing this, but you're like, are you okay? Like, are you? Maybe they're not. I don't know. But anyway, daily pep talks is my to yourself to find that inner strength, and like you gotta really combat it with love. I always say that.
I can just offer, I love hearing that story. Good for you for going to the dean. That's powerful. Good for you. I'm proud of you. The what I can then offer, if you're considering, I heard nursing school or even into healthcare, is now more than ever, there's such an opportunity And there are mandates at many different levels that want Indigenous group people, us, to enter into healthcare. But also not only just to enter and do that frontline and point of care work, but to be elevated into leadership in these systems to continue to combat everything that we've been talking about in this session. I think around just dealing with racism, we at all levels have had these microaggressions and racism directed towards us. As I was no different in nursing school as well. I think it's similarly, it's surrounding yourself by your loved ones, really, your family, your friends, and just have that goal in mind, the end goal, and yeah, it's an incredible accomplishment, and there's so much one can offer entering into healthcare now more than ever. So thanks.
Thank you. And we have a ton of other questions, but just gonna wrap it up after these next two questions. So the question is, do you think or did you find having a mentor in nursing school would be helpful? And then I'm just going to add on to that question. Would you be open to being a mentor for any future Indigenous nurses that may be interested? Let's go with Ines.
Absolutely. I think that would have been helpful. I had to pick mentors for myself who were Indigenous, those who weren't Indigenous. And I don't think I knew that I could. I tried to connect with faculty that I felt aligned with and understood my lived experience. And I think only really until recently embraced that, but what I jokingly call it the PhD in my Indigenous lived experience. So much lived experience and tick so many of the boxes and realized, oh yeah, that's a PhD level in knowledge that I bring to this role. And not really realizing that. And throughout nursing school, I realized, oh, I have this lived experience about this. Like looking at some of the students that I was going to school with, they really didn't have some of the exposure to the world that I did. And sometimes in a extremely difficult way, but realizing that that had brought me strength. And so looking at those experiences from a strength base and having that encouragement from a mentor is so important, especially when you have difficult experiences, first for yourself. Sometimes we have so many personal things that are going on in our lives based on how our communities, our families are struggling. How do we navigate that? How do we rise above? And sometimes just having somebody in your corner is so important. And I think the worldview that I bring to my personal wellness, but also that I would lend to those who want to go into Indigenous health is I see it as a darkness. We're working to collectively lift a darkness. And when we work in the darkness, we have to really put our armor on, and how my family has taught me, it's that spiritual armor so that we're protecting ourselves, but not blocking the love to come in at the same time. So how do we manage that? And that's a daily maintenance. So, my personal practices, I go to the water every day. I'm a paddler. I try to continue to learn on my learning journey of different spiritual practices. So we would go to the mountain and do morning baths. Well, I couldn't do that at UBC. So I would pray in the shower because I lived on campus. So, there's different ways that we can adapt our self-care. And I would be more than happy to connect with an Indigenous nurse to support you and encourage you and cheerlead you in your journey, because we need you. So please don't hesitate. Sign up. We're waiting for you. And we'd love to have you on our teams in community, at an FNHA, or even in the health authorities. So as my grandma would say, get on with it.
Thank you. And then one of our other question, the next question is, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, just following the COVID pandemic, it seems that there's some more vaccine fatigue and there continues to be vaccine hesitancy. I know we touched on this a bit about talking to clients to build trust and not necessarily around vaccines. Just wondering what your guys' thoughts are on how nurses can better support community members in vaccine trust and acceptance.
I can speak to that a little bit. I came into First Nations Health Authority right when the COVID vaccine was coming out, and there was a lot of hesitancy. And, you know, each individual that you speak to, it's their journey, it's their life. And what you have to do as a nurse is help support them in any way you can. So they may come in and they may have questions about vaccines, and all you can do is listen to them, listen to their worries, their questions, what they have knowledge of, and learn from them. And then after that, you can share your knowledge of the vaccines. And I always go into the mindset of, yeah, it's their life, it's their journey, it's their decision. I will never, ever try to influence or convince somebody, but I will share my knowledge. And I found that in doing that, I've developed those professional relationships with them in where they actually do decide to get the vaccine. And I tell them my shared experience with, you know, the COVID vaccine. Knock on wood, I've never experienced anaphylaxis. And I tell them that, you know, like I haven't seen any long-term effects from people getting the vaccine. And I think sharing with them my stories of my experience as a nurse with the vaccine really helps them make their decision. So yeah, that's how I do things.
I like that. And then, so we're at the time that we end the webinar. Did you guys have any closing remarks you want to share? Just any parting words with our audience? Nope. That sounds good. And yeah, so I just want to say thank you so much to all our guests and for everyone for joining us today. It was so great to hear from our great team here and the amazing discussion, just sharing your passion for nursing and what got you into nursing and the continued work you do for community and our Indigenous community. And yeah, so just before we end the webinar, we'd love to bring your attention to our upcoming webinars. Our next one is in September, so put it in your calendar. It is, if you want to check out any upcoming ones, it's on our website at www.learningscircle.ubc.ca. We also have a newsletter that will be in the chat. And yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us today. We all look forward to seeing everyone at our next Learning Circle. Lim, thank you.